Hello, friends. This is Kim C., and you're listening to the Year of Underrated Stephen King. I'm a university fiction teacher who moonlights as a Stephen King podcaster. I take this one-woman show to the underrated, underexplored King titles that need some eyes and some analysis on them, and today, my friend Bryant helps me do just that. For today's Constant Reader interview, we're speaking with my friend Bryant Burnette. He is a Stephen King archivist who has been an early fan and supportive pen pal of the show. Bryant is your guy with a hard-to-find King magazine publication. Suddenly a beautiful PDF is in your inbox, as well as superior knowledge, having read all of Stephen King's works. He is the guru and go-to for King publication dates, films. The man is a plethora of brilliance, and I'm thrilled for you all to hear our chat session. So please welcome Bryant-the-Brilliant Burnette to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the wonderful Bryant Burnette to the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. Hello, Bryant.
Hello, how are you?
I am so well. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
I'm excited to have been described as wonderful. I don't know where you got that, but we'll go with it.
You are, dear sir. You have been an early fan of the show, a tremendous corresponding individual who has blessed me with some amazing Stephen King PDFs I would have never got my hands on without you. So yes, you are indeed wonderful. I'm so excited to chat with you and learn more about your Stephen King archive. Let's dive in to this archive. Tell me about your collection. What does it all entail?
It entails basically everything I can get my hands on. I'm not super wild in terms of like making sure that I've got to have a copy of every edition of everything that comes out. I'm not necessarily that kind of a collector. But if Stephen King wrote it and it's out there, I want to have a copy of it. Not just for the sake of having an archive, but just for the sake of it being enjoyable to read. Even when it comes to little tiny nonfiction pieces, his work is just, so enjoyable. Why would you not collect it?
Absolutely. And so this extends to more than just paper stuff, right? This is audio, video, it extends in that direction, correct?
Yeah, I've got all the movies. I've got a lot of the audio books. I'm not as fastidious about that, but you know what they say about a fool and his money. So
Absolutely. So let's start with our very first question to begin all Constant Reader interviews, and that is, what was your very first Stephen King title, and how old were you?
Okay. It takes a minute to tell this story, and there's a couple of different answers depending on what way you look at it. So bear with me, and I'll do the briefest version of this that I can.
Not needed. We got the time.
Okay. All right, I'll be expansive then.
Yeah, take us on a journey.
So when I was a kid, and I'm 48, so I was born in 74. When I was a kid, I was a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, and I promise this is relevant. When the movie The Running Man came out, I really wanted to see it, and since it was rated R, my mom wouldn't let my dad take me to see it. So as a consolation prize, he bought me a copy of the book, which obviously was written by Stephen King. I had no interest in it because it was a Stephen King book. I just wanted to read it because it was the closest thing that I could get to watching this new Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. So I read it, and it's nothing like the movie whatsoever. And I kind of pieced that together for myself as I read it, but I still enjoyed reading it. So, the name Stephen King was on the cover, and it kind of stuck with me. Flash forward to a few years later. 1990 is when The Stand came out, the extended version of The Stand. And my dad read a review of it in some newspaper and was telling me that this novel called The Stand, that was about this epic fight between good and evil, had come out. And it had been written by Steven Spielberg, is what my dad tells me. He just got the details wrong. Well, being a child of the 80s, obviously, I was also a huge Steven Spielberg fan. So I was like, wow, Steven Spielberg wrote a 1,000-page novel about battle between good and evil at the end of the world? All right. Next thing I do is I go to a bookstore to try to find this, only to find that it wasn't written by Steven Spielberg at all. It was written by Stephen King. I was crushed. But I remembered, wait a minute, Stephen King is that guy that wrote The Running Man. I think maybe I'll give this a shot anyways. And literally have not stopped reading Stephen King since.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
So I would have been, I guess, either 15 or 16.
That's impressive for a 15, 16-year-old to read all of The Stand, the expanded edition on top of that.
Well, it was actually the cut version that I ended up getting because I looked for it in a used bookstore and that's what they had. But I did read the expanded one not too long after that. But, in just exploring Stephen King fandom, I've found a lot of people talking about how they read things like The Stand or even It as early as like age 8. So I think it's just one of those things that there's something about his work that appeals to younger people. And I think in a lot of cases, it sort of marks that transition for them between reading kid books and reading adult books.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is the beckoning bridge for sure, especially with the wonderful covers from the 80s. The spooky covers, they totally draw you in.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it, actually.
The Stand was the kind of first one, we'll say, technically. Technically, it was Richard Bachman's Running Man, but we'll go with The Stand as, like, the big one. So Randall Flagg is the big bad in that one. So my next question is about your favorite villains in the Stephen King universe. Who really does it for you?
I don't know if I have just one that I would point to as saying, all right, this is my favorite Stephen King villain. If I did, it might be Flagg just because he was the one that got in there first. But Pennywise, I think if I absolutely had to give an answer to that question, it would be Pennywise, just because Pennywise, or the entity who is Pennywise, sort of encompasses everything, right? Like all of evil is contained within this one being. So it's kind of hard to top that. Then again, if I stop and think about it, I don't know that there is anyone more hissable in all of Stephen King's fiction than Big Jim Rennie.
Yes.
So there's a scenario where I can kind of say, well, Pennywise is evil just because, Pennywise is an immortal being from beyond space and time. Well, of course that's evil. He/she is just being what they are. Big Jim Rennie is just a dick.
Yes, the biggest.
What's his excuse? I know what Pennywise's excuse is. What's Big Jim Rennie's excuse?
Oh my god, I love it. You are so correct in that. Oh man, yeah, Big Jim Rennie, he hasn't been topped for me yet. We'll see as I get to know Flagg more and more if he tops him, but I don't know. I agree with you. Big Jim Rennie is very much up there for me. Transitioning to, I was thinking about one of my past Constant Reader interviews, a friend of mine named Jamie Stewart, who has reread every single King novel. It's astonishing. Which Stephen King novels have got a repeat read for you? Are you someone who's kind of reread a large chunk of them, or which ones have got more than one read?
I haven't reread every single one of them by any means, but I know after I read The Stand in 1990, I just plowed my way through as many of them as I could find, which was most of the ones that were out at that point in time. And I think I reread most of those probably 3 or 4 times that first year or so. Everything since then, I think I'd say probably about half of them I've reread. And that number goes up if you count audiobooks, which obviously do count. But there are, I don't know, there's probably a couple of dozen of them that I've never reread at all that I want to and just never have. Like, I know I loved Do McKee the first time I read it, but I've only read it a single time. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to that one at some point.
Yay! I'm excited for you.
Yeah, I've got a friend that swears that that's the best novel Stephen King ever wrote. And I don't think I can quite go that far based on the single read, but Give me a second read, and who knows? Some of the more recent ones, obviously, I've read once, but I think of myself in terms of sort of being in a perpetual state of rereading King, which doesn't mean that I'm necessarily only reading King. It doesn't mean that every day goes by that I'm reading something by him, but just in theory, I'm perpetually in the state of rereading his work because it rewards it.
Ain't that the truth? I want to meet your friend. I want to meet your friend because, oh man, I'm obsessed with Duma-Key. As you know, I never stop talking about it. But I wanted to ask my next question. If you have any Stephen King titles that you've noticed over the years, you really love them, but not a lot of people do, and vice versa. What are the ones that you sort of turn your nose up at because you don't feel as strongly for it?
Let's start with that because that way I'll give you the opportunity to just hang up on me. I'm not a Lacey's Story fan.
Understood.
I wish that I was, and let me be clear what I mean by that. I feel like about 1/3 of that book is bad. I wouldn't even say bad. I shouldn't say bad, at least. It just doesn't work for me. And about 1/3 of it is, run of the mill. Another third of it is as good as anything he's ever written. So it's a frustrating novel for me. I wish that I loved it the way so many other people do. And who knows, maybe one day I will.
You are completely validated by many. Lacey's Story, I've always called it, that's capstone King. That is master level King, only because it is so polarizing. And it took me 3 times to love it. And I think I mostly fell in love with the puzzle nature of it. But no, I completely understand. And I think that's a very fair evaluation of it.
And then the flip side of that coin, I seem to be a bigger fan of the Tommyknockers than most people are. I probably would say that I like Roadwork more than most people seem to. It's not like a personal favorite or anything, but I do like it a lot. And then the other one that comes to mind is Danse Macabre, the nonfiction book that he wrote in the 80s. That's just a fantastic book, and you don't really hear people mention it very often.
I need to get my hands on that one. I'm so excited to read more King nonfiction, and for whatever reason it just fell off my radar and I didn't realize it was nonfiction. And Roadwork is another one I also haven't read. I need to beef up my Bachman consumption again. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that those are 2 that you really enjoyed. That's exciting.
I think you especially would be interested in Danse Macabre because it came out of, I can't remember how long this went on, but during the late 70s, King sort of went back to teaching for a little while, not on a full-time basis, but he was an instructor and taught a few classes at his alma mater. And he taught things like Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I believe. And this book sort of sprung out of his lecture notes for his classes. So I think you would probably get a lot out of it.
Oh my gosh, yes, I did not know that. Thank you so much, Bryant. Oh my gosh, yeah, I need to get a copy today, like yesterday, because those are some of the best Gothic novels ever. So now I'm even more curious. Endless well of inspiration. Stemming from your personal favorites and not so favorites, do you have a character from Stephen King's universe who you feel is deserving of their own standalone novel, much like Danny received with Dr. Sleep? Who do you feel could get their own prequel, sequel, or just their own spotlight like Holly Gibney?
That is a great question, and I'm not answering immediately because I literally just turned and looked at my bookcase. I'd really love to see where Charlie McGee is from Firestarter these days. That's the first thing that comes to mind. What's Charlie like as a grown-up?
Agree wholeheartedly. She was only 9 years old when we left her at the end of that novel, and it's like, oh my goodness, we have an entire life we could cover. I was chatting with Julia Marquesi not too long ago, and I had this just epiphany. I think she could pop up in a Holly Gibney novel. I really would love a fan fiction, if any listeners write fan fiction out there, to write a Charlie McGee meets Holly Gibney in the Finders Keepers detective agency. I think we can make it happen. I'm spreading some seeds out there to some listeners because I know Bryant would read it, right?
Oh, I would literally read anything that said Stephen King on the cover because I'm a sucker. But on the subject of Holly, it took me a while to sort of embrace her because I'm really not that big a fan of the three Bill Hodges books. And then when The Outsider came out, I liked that novel and I thought she was okay in it, but it wasn't. It was kind of one of those things where I was like, here he is on his Holly thing again. It's just some idea he's gotten in his brain and can't get out of it. But the novella, If It Bleeds, I really liked. And it sort of turned me into a Holly fan to the extent that, I'm really looking forward to Holly the novel, which is coming out presumably next year. So I'm a lot more receptive to that idea than I would have been at one point in time. So yeah, bring that on. Absolutely.
I feel the same, and I think I'm pretty similar in terms of how long it took for the pot of water to heat up concerning Holly, because I'm with you. It took a minute. I was very perplexed as to why she kept getting a spotlight at first, because she seemed like such a background character. And then just as we started to receive more and more spotlight, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, I think it was If It Bleeds that finally did it. Finally. The Outsider helped, but If It Bleeds provided the final push I needed to say, okay, I like this person. I like this person a lot.
I would love to read some sort of an essay from King on the subject of Holly in terms of how she evolved for him over time, because I would imagine that it was an organic process. The way he describes his writing has always been that things just sort of happen, as he's writing, and he goes with the flow. So I can't imagine that when he sat down and wrote Mr. Mercedes and she first appeared, that it was because of some grand plan that he had, that he was going to introduce this character who over the next however many years was going to be a big deal in his work. I think it was more likely that there was just something in that character that he kept coming back to. And I'd be fascinated to hear him talk about, how that happened and why he feels like she's taken on the importance that she has.
I would love that as well. I do hope we get that. That would be fascinating. In addition to Holly characters and titles that we're just super passionate about, in regards to being a constant reader, it's a wonderful club. It's a wonderful badge of honor we all carry. Every now and again, we do run into non-King readers. I wanted to ask, what do you recommend to non-King readers who really have never danced with the King?
In general, I don't, to be honest. If somebody, finds out that I'm a huge Stephen King fan and asks me about it, I've got questions that I can answer along those lines, but I'm not what I'd call an evangelist for King necessarily. I don't go out and try to spread the word or anything. I figure people will find him or they won't. That's their business. But if I were in the position of being asked by somebody, hey, can you recommend me a Stephen King book? I'd like to read a Stephen King book. I'd probably base that on their personality. So I don't have like one answer for that question. I'd sort of base it on what I thought might work for them.
So someone who does not want to be scared at all, hates scary stuff, what would you send their way?
On writing, I think.
Lovely.
Because, well, even that has some scary stuff in it, but it's couched more sort of in a autobiographical thing. So I think that would be a book that, well, first of all, it's just incredibly well written and very interesting. And it's autobiographical enough that I think it would potentially make people be like, oh, this is what Stephen King's all about. Oh, okay. Maybe I should read something else by him. And then they could go from there. But in terms of fiction for somebody that was just determined to avoid the horrific. I'd probably go with some of the short stories, to be honest. Pick out a handful of short stories like The Reach or The Woman in the Room, things like that. I think that's what I'd go with.
Oh, smart, those ones. I haven't read The Woman in the Room yet, but I have gushed ad nauseum about The Reach and Mrs. Todd's Shortcut, so good choices. Which collection is that? Night Shift, The Woman in the Room?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the last story in Night Shift. Read that on a strong day. I'll say that.
Such good advice. Will do. I will take that to heart. Absolutely. All right, so this is one of my favorite questions inside the Constant Reader interview experience, only because it's just so loaded and open and you could go wherever you like with this question. What are your thoughts regarding the Dark Tower?
I love The Dark Tower. If I had to pick one single King novel that I would say is my favorite, it would be The Gunslinger. So, so yeah, I'm very pro Dark Tower. There have been times where I feel like he could probably stand to not make so many connections. I kind of like for his non-Tower novels to be standalones and not have that many connections, which makes me a strange Dark Tower fan, I know. But as far as the books themselves go, yeah, I love them.
So the Gunslinger is, I mean, granted, as you know, I've only made it to Wizard and Glass, but it seems like a lot of the constant readers out there and Dark Tower fans, when they encourage friends and family to read The Dark Tower, they always tell everyone, you gotta just grit your teeth and bear it and get through The Gunslinger. You just gotta do it. You gotta get through it. But yet you love it so, so much. So I kind of want to dig into that a little bit and explain to the listeners where the love comes from, because there is a lot of negativity surrounding The Gunslinger.
I don't get it. I do not get it. Like I've heard this many, many times and I do not get it. Now, granted, I've probably read that novel. I don't even know. I've probably read it a dozen times because it's short and easy to digest. But yeah, I just think it's just a really strong novel from top to bottom. Like I've heard people say that nothing happens in it, and that's crazy to me. Everything happens in it. Are you kidding? It's just one thing after another. There are lulls, but all of those lulls mean something. They're all building character, and they're not just sitting there on the page dead. It's a very lively novel. That's how I feel about it, at least.
I remember reading The Gunslinger and finding it strange the way each of the five parts interact with each other. It seems a little disjointed, but that didn't necessarily make it a bad story. So I'm wondering if maybe the negativity is coming from the confusion of readers trying to hunt for a traditional reading experience and being a little perplexed. Because, for example, in the first part, when he's in Tull, he meets Sylvia, and there's that massacre. And then the next part is the way station where Jake appears out of nowhere, and you're like, what's going on? So I'm wondering if maybe it's just confusion.
It could be. And some of that may stem from the fact that all five of those were initially published separately as short stories. I don't know what extent they were written separately, but there's an argument to be made that that's not a novel, it's a short story collection. So that may explain some of the disjointedness, but I don't remember ever feeling that way when I read it as a young man. It just struck me as just a single thing because that's all I knew it as. But at the same time, like I don't want to discount anybody else's experience of it because obviously that is a thing that a lot of people have said. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I'm wondering if we could do a rebranding. If we could maybe, I mean, it'll never happen, of course, but hypothetically, if we had the power to say The Gunslinger, Dark Tower Short Story Collection.
If so, I don't think it would be wrong. They did all appear that way, which, by the way, going back to the subject of collecting, that's That's one of my absolute prized possessions of Stephen King collecting is that I've got those 5 original magazines.
Oh, that's awesome. So where each Dark Tower installment appeared, was it Science Fiction magazine? Remind me?
A magazine of fantasy and science fiction.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite character from the Dark Tower universe?
I mean, it's got to be Roland. I love so many of the other characters. I mean, Eddie, Susanna, Jake. Well, I'm gonna, I almost named somebody I shouldn't name for those who haven't read past Wizard and Glass, but Oi, obviously.
Oh, thank you for your delicate touch with that because, yeah, I don't know these people yet, so maybe it's fine, but I appreciate the consideration. Going from Dark Tower, do you have in your mind's eye what you feel is maybe using worst is kind of a strong word, but let's just say maybe the poorest Stephen King title? Do you have a selection that you feel this is kind of terrible?
I think my absolute least favorite Stephen King book is End of Watch. That one just did not do anything for me at all. And I'm sure at some point I'll reread it and feel a little bit better about it because it would frankly be hard for me to feel any worse about it right now. And I say that comparing it only to other Stephen King books. I'd still rather read that than literally anything by any number of other authors I can think of.
Right.
But as a Stephen King novel, it just, I don't know. I feel like that series got away from him as it progressed. And a big part of what made me feel that way is the fact that, and this is a slight spoiler, but I'll just have to give this one, the fact that he ends up introducing the supernatural into the series. And it felt to me like he set out wanting to write some really just hard boiled crime novels. And he did that with the first one, did it with the second one to a somewhat lesser extent, and then just sort of turned his back on that with the third one. And for me, that didn't work.
I can agree with that. Absolutely. End of Watch was my least favorite of the Bill Hodges trilogy for sure. I thought Mr. Mercedes was pretty cool. Brady Hartsfield was creepy. I enjoyed getting to know Bill, of course. I was enjoying what it was for what it was. And then Finders Keepers really roped me in. I loved that one. That one was very cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. End of Watch, what happened there? What happened there with, I think it's wholeheartedly accurate with what you said of perhaps he intended for it to go a certain way and then he kind of fell through a trapdoor in terms of introducing the supernatural. And
Yeah.
I agree. Once I started to recognize where we were headed, I too was a little unsatisfied for sure.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, he sort of throws that in at the very end of Finders Keepers. And when that happened, I was just like, oh, no. No, Steve, what are you doing? Which is weird because, I'm a long-term committed Stephen King reader, and obviously most of his stuff has something of that nature in it. So it's not like I mind there being another psychic in a Stephen King novel, or whatever you would refer to that as being. I just didn't need it to be in those novels.
Right.
But, I'll reread them someday and probably will like them better.
Hopefully, maybe time will be kind and we'll both have a little bit more grace for End of Watch. But I don't know. I'm really content with rereading Mr. Mercedes because I was super duper creeped out by Brady Hartsfield. I think he was a very good villain and I do enjoy a good
Yeah.
King villain. The relationship with his mom is just icky, icky, icky and dark. And I didn't hate it because I was roped in by the story. So the fact that Brady was just as irredeemable as they get, I was okay with that because it made me root for his death, which I don't hate doing, cheering on the death
Yeah.
of the villain.
Well, there's something there that feels honest, right? That's the thing about Brady as an awful character is that it still feels like an honest story. It doesn't feel like he pulled his punches or anything. King in writing Brady, I mean. It doesn't feel like he tried to make him more awful than he just was. He's just a legitimately awful person. He feels like he's real. That's what works about him. And, the stuff with his mother is icky, but let's face it, this stuff happens in the real world. A lot of times it happens to people who end up being psychopaths. So that's what worked to me about that particular character and story, is that it just felt honest. Horrible, but honest.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's a super great way of framing it. Yeah, I think that is why it works. It felt very authentic for this particular character and the ugliness that is very real and prevalent in the world. Yeah, I really like that a lot.
Conk him on the head and turn him into a guy that can manipulate people telepathically using a video game. That feels less honest to me.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of what bothered me there.
I'm raising my hand into a thumbs down motion on that because I too am booing. I was booing when I got to end of watch and realized that that was the direction we were headed.
Yeah, if it started out that way, I think it would have been a different thing altogether. But I think I just pieced that together for myself, is that that's what bothered me about it, is that he took it from something that felt fundamentally honest to something that felt fundamentally dishonest.
That's huge. I'm actually going to keep that. I'm going to tuck that away in the back of my mind because I think there's a lot of times in my reading I have a big problem and it feels like a huge pothole in my thought process. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what? Why can't I? What's going on? Like, why are you in such a bad mood over this? And so that really hits it on the head, I think. That's incredibly helpful in terms of looking at something that veers a certain direction, and that concept really helps flesh it out for sure.
I know that feeling you're referring to, where there's just something sticking in your mind that you can't settle for yourself. I don't teach writing the way that you do, but I went to school and got an English degree, so I have some of that training. And yeah, there are just times where it's like, all right, why do I feel the way I feel about this? I don't quite know why, and I need to figure this out.
I'm with you there. Yep, from one English grad to another, you know exactly how that feels, and you just mull around it. It's like a little rock I'm holding in my hand, but it's in my brain, and I'm turning it and turning it and turning it.
Mhm.
But honesty and authenticity, I think that works so well. It works so well of maybe asking myself that question. Is King being honest right now? Is this feeling authentic? That's really going to help me in the future, so thank you, Brian.
You bet. And I think that's one of the reasons why his work is so vital, is that in almost all occasions it feels honest. There are going to be times when maybe he doesn't quite hit the mark with that, but I'd say 95% of the time he does.
Agree. And I think that's why so many of us love his writing as much as we do, because there's that connection with those characters and with that true voice. My next question revolves, I actually just was going over this in class today, setting. So, thinking about all the famous and infamous Stephen King locations, with those in mind, do you have a favorite Stephen King setting where you wouldn't mind getting stuck for a little while?
Mm, that's a good one. I mean, most Stephen King locations seem like there's something pretty awful happening there. So I don't, in real world terms, I don't know that there are many that I would want to be stuck in. But if I had to go with one, I guess I'd find it hard to pass up seeing what Midworld looked like. So I'll go with that. It would probably end up being really, really bad, but I think that's what I'd have to go with.
Nice. I like that one a lot.
Look, I got to go out one way or another, so it may as well be in Midworld.
As I was asking that question, because mine flips around a lot. I always want to go to Doomakey because it's like, why not? Why wouldn't I want to be on the Florida coast?
See, now, that's a sensible answer. Why couldn't I come up with a sensible answer?
No worries. And then, of course, my other one is Joyland because, yeah, I want to hang out at Joyland all day and do all the things at the theme park. That's my other one. But lately, to just today, I was like, I think I want to go to Derry in 1958, but I want to go help Jake Epping. So I want to help him from 11/22/63. I want to go help Jake. I would most likely encounter the Losers Club in Derry because they would be there at that time. But it would be to kind of hang out with Jake Epping a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I could get into that. All right. Well, I guess let me ask: is this like a real world scenario where this happens, or is this more like the holodeck on Star Trek: The Next Generation, where you're getting to just turn the program off whenever it gets too uncomfortable? Because if that's the case, then I could probably if that were the case, I'd kind of like to be in the stand.
Nice.
But only if I can do things like turn the smell off, because the world of the stand smells horrendous.
Oh yeah, gross.
But if I could do that, then that might be fun to play around in.
Yeah, it is your question to do what thou wilt, so absolutely you can hit pause button. Typically I am more on the side of it's the real world. So if this is reality, where would you like to hang out for a little while? But, this is also King. So yeah, press the pause button wherever and let's filter out the stench of rotting bodies.
Yeah, that doesn't seem very fun in a real world type thing.
So I wanted to jump back to the big sort of epic Stephen King journeys, or just the ones that we invest a lot of time in, whether it's a challenging Stephen King text. Has there ever been one where the ending was just so unsatisfying it kind of ruined the journey? Or are you someone who can kind of let it go at the end and focus on the good parts?
In general, I'm not one of those people that agrees that Stephen King has a hard time with endings. I think more often than not, that's a complete falsehood. There are probably a handful of examples where he didn't end it quite as well as he could have, but there's sort of almost a meme out there that all Stephen King endings are bad, and I don't get that. The closest thing that I've ever really come to feeling that on my own is that, and this wasn't on an initial read, but when I reread The Stand at some point, probably 10 years or so after reading it the first time, I sort of got to be a little disgruntled with the way things ended in Las Vegas. That sort of started to feel a little bit weak to me, but then later on I sort of course corrected on that, and I don't even feel that way anymore. And even then, like it didn't ruin the experience or anything, because even if I thought that stuff was outright awful, which I don't, the rest of the book, including what comes after it, is so good that it almost doesn't matter.
I've had a lot of constant readers who have mentioned the ending of The Stand as one that they really struggled with, but the journey is so rewarding that you kind of let it go and do whatever you can with what you've got.
It also, and like, I don't want to get too deep into it for the sake of anybody that might not have read it, but it also makes so much thematic sense the way that he ends it that I don't see any way to thumbs down that personally. I think at one point in time I just wanted it to be more like some kind of a weird battle scenario, which would be the complete wrong way to go with that. But somehow that idea got in my mind for a while and then eventually left again.
Now that we've kind of talked about the journey a little bit, I wanted to ask if you have a top 3 or a top 5 list of your favorite Stephen King novels or short story collections, novella collections. What is on the list and why is it there?
Well, I already said that The Gunslinger would be my number one, and I think I'd stick with that. There have been times where I said It was my number one, because It is just, I mean, what more can be said about It that hasn't been said already? But it's just such an impeccable, epic piece of work that if I could only pick one to take with me to the proverbial desert island, it might be that one, just because there's so much in it. So there are days when I could claim that as my number one. So that's 2. Number 3, I think I'd go with Different Seasons, because everything in it is just so good. And I'm the weirdo that thinks the breathing method is the best of the four, by the way.
Wow, okay.
Oh, right.
Let's unpack that. Tell me more.
I just, I think, well, for one thing, if you look at that collection, it's all about storytelling. Every novella in it is about storytelling. The Shawshank Redemption is Red telling you the story of Andy Dufresne. So just on a prose level, it's very much one guy telling a story. Apt Pupil is about the danger of story. It's about a set of very dangerous stories being passed from one bad person to another. The Body is about a guy learning to become a storyteller, looking back on having learned to become a storyteller. So then to end that collection with the breathing method, which is all about people telling stories to one another in a place where some sort of really mysterious thing is going on. I don't know. To me, that just puts a really great bow on that collection.
That is such a beautiful way of describing different seasons. I love that so, so much. And it makes me hate Apt Pupil a little less. Only because, not insulting Apt Pupil, because it is fascinating. I will give it that. It's just so dark for me, Bryant. Like, it made me feel icky in my soul. And that's huge.
Try being a 15 to 16-year-old boy and reading that for the first time. Ooh,
Ooh, ooh,
rough stuff.
yes.
But once again, it goes back to the thing of it being honest. It feels honest and therefore it feels useful. So like that's one of those things that I totally understand somebody reading Apt Pupil and then saying, nope, never gonna read that again.
Yep, that's me.
Yep.
But the breathing method is one that when I first read it, I was shocked because it's just, wow, that ending, that is climactic and shocking. But I also love the Manhattan Club so much. Oh my
Yep.
gosh. So it's like these two wonderful, highly decorated slices of bread, these beautiful sandwich of this wild tale, the Winter's Tale, and then smashed against this very cool premise of the Manhattan Club and what's in there, and these gentlemen who walk into that brownstone and it's traveling through time. I don't know, but I do really, really love breathing method. And so I guess I can understand that. Yeah, I can see it being a number one for sure.
Yeah, it hasn't always been. That's one of those that's just grown on me every time over the years that I've reread that collection. And I think that the mystery of it is a big part of it because like I don't ever want that question to be answered. What what's going on behind the walls of the club? I don't care. I don't need to know that. I don't want to know that. The mystery of it is what pulls me in. So as much as I'd love to see Stephen King return to the club, just like as a storytelling device, I don't ever want him to answer the question of what's going on there. Don't need it.
Oh, that's so good. That's really good. I love that. And I'm so glad that you told me that the club was originally revealed in The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands in Skeleton Crew, which was published after different seasons, right?
It's a little convoluted actually because that short story came out in I can't remember if it was in a magazine or in a collection, but that short story technically came out before different seasons did. So if you look at it from a standpoint of literal first publication, The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands came first. But I cannot imagine a scenario where he didn't write the breathing method first and then it just didn't get published for a while. I have no way of knowing for sure, but that's how it seems to me.
So we've got The Gunslinger, we have It, and we have different seasons. Do we have a 4 and a 5 or just a top 3?
If pressed, I could probably come up with something, but I think for the purposes of this interview, what I'll say is there's probably about 30 things in spots 4 and 5. I could narrow it down, but it'd be tough. I really love Carrie. I really love the Wastelands and the Drawing of the Three and Wizard and Glass. The Stand, obviously. The Green Mile on writing. The Dead Zone. There's a lot.
I agree with you. I have a top 15.
Yeah.
The top, I only have 4 gold. I don't have 5 gold because that's how it's so hard, Brian, as you know.
Oh, I do know. Oh my God, I didn't say Misery. I didn't say Gerald's Game or Dolores Claiborne. Those are both A pluses. Ah, it's brutal. So yeah, let's just stick with the top three, and then there's probably 25 to 30 A pluses that come after that.
I think many a listener will agree that the struggle is very real and impossible for a top 10, a top 15. It just gets insanely hard.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you have a signed Stephen King book. You might. But if you don't, and you have the opportunity to get one Stephen King book signed, what would it be?
I don't have any signed actual Stephen King books. There is one, gosh, I can't remember the name of it. One of the short stories from the early 2000s. Let's go, I'm going to say it was Stationary Bike, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Anyways, the collection that came out in, I do have a limited edition of that was signed by every author that was in that anthology, one of whom was Stephen King. So I've got that, but in terms of his actual books, I don't have any that are autographed. I'm not an autograph guy. Like that's one of those things that it's cool. If Stephen King showed up and just wanted to autograph every book that I've got, sure, Steve, knock yourself out. But that's not something that really matters to me. I would just be more interested in talking to Stephen King. But if I could pick one to get autographed, I still have that paperback copy of The Stand. That was the first one of his that I read. That was what caused me to really become a fan of his. So I would have him autograph that, complete with the used bookstore stamp inside the front cover, the cover almost falling off. I think that's the one I'd go with.
Oh, that's amazing. That's perfect. I love that it's just well loved and tattered, and that's the best kind.
Absolutely.
Unlike myself, you seem like a very calm, composed, cool as a cucumber, collected individual.
Oh, sorry. No, not at all. Not at all. But I'm happy to sound that way.
Well, you definitely play it well. So I was thinking to myself, my friends from the King Size podcast, Matt and Simon, they wrote to Steve and they asked him to be on their show, and they're like, yeah, Kim, you should do the same. And I was like, are you nuts? I would self-combust. I really would. I just, I would be a laughing idiot of nonsensical. I would just absolutely short circuit because yeah, I wouldn't be able to hold it together. And I don't know when I would ask him. Do you know if you had the amazing opportunity, maybe we'll all go to Maine on a pilgrimage and do the Stephen King tour in Bangor, and he just pops around the corner and he's nice and he chats to us? What would you ask or what would you say to Steve?
I would not mention his work at all. I would do everything in my power either to just talk to him like he was a dude, which he is. I'd probably ask him something stupid like, "Hey, what's your favorite James Bond movie?"
That's so
Something stupid
smooth.
like that. I would actually, if I had an opportunity to talk to him, I would really love to talk to him about his relationship to his wife's writing because I haven't read all of her books, but I've really enjoyed all of the Tabitha King books that I have read. Like you never hear him talk about any of that in interviews, but there's got to be things there. So I would just love to know, what his relationship is to his wife's writing in terms of, does he read it before it's published? She hasn't published anything in a while, but back when she was publishing, did he read it before she published it? Things like that.
That is so smart and that is so smooth. And you would win the prize for staying composed because I would fail. I would fail immensely. I love that. That's an awesome question. That would, I think, get a response and his attention, and that would, yeah, that's awesome. I knew you would have a good one.
You just got to figure that Stephen King probably doesn't love being Stephen King all the time when he talks to people. So, like, the real answer to the question is, I probably wouldn't talk to Stephen King at all because Stephen King's got much better stuff to do than talking to yokels like me.
Right.
But, if we're stuck in an elevator and it dies and we have to talk about stuff, I'll just talk to him like he's a dude.
I think that's smart. I think that's smart. I would try to, A, not lose it. Not that I would fangirl, I would just get really. When I get excited, I talk really fast and I'm not clear. I'm just a short-circuiting little spinning top. So I would try and focus on writing and ask him about how he tries to teach and reach through these stories. I would try to make it work, but I would most likely screw it up.
No, I think that would be a good direction to go because if you watch interviews with him, certainly from back in the day, one of the things he brings up from time to time is that he wishes people would talk about the writing more, like not the characters or the gross out scenes or things like that. He wants to talk about the writing. So yeah, you would have an avenue to explore there.
Oh, that gives me such hope. It really does. Because, yeah, I love the films and I love the scary stuff as well. I'm a little fraidy cat. I don't do well with it. I stomach it as best as I can and struggle for weeks after with the nightmares. But the whole reason I got into this game was because I loved his writing so, so much. It will always return to that. So I would hope that would get me an in for sure.
Just the fact that you were both teachers, you've got common ground there.
Totally. That's where I would go. I would ask him, Dear Steve, as a former English teacher, let's talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because
I can almost guarantee you he'd be thrilled to have that conversation because I don't think anybody has ever asked him that before.
that's one thing I really love is I'm rereading right now. I'm rereading Mr. Harrigan's Phone before the film comes out on Netflix. I can't wait. And I'm rereading it and I'm loving it so much. And he is referencing all of these classic novels. He's referencing Heart of Darkness. And I'm like, reading King makes you read the classics. Like he's still an English teacher deep down inside. And that just warms my soul so much. Like he makes it those terrible days in high school where you just wanted to go home and watch TV or hang out with your friends and you read these books and you just wanted to forget them, they'll stay with you for life. And King makes that so. He makes it rewarding.
Yeah, there's a big aspect of that in Low Men in Yellow Coats as well.
Lord of the Flies. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I loved that so much. And there's these classic novels are everywhere in his work. And it just absolutely gives my heart wings because it makes all of that drudgery in English class in high school so worth it because you're like, oh, this is why we read these books. This is why we celebrate these novels that are old. They're not irrelevant. They're totally not. Stephen King wants us to know them, have read them. It's brilliant.
I had been hearing about Lord of the Flies forever, and I've got this really cool edition that has an introduction by Stephen King, which I bought a few years back because it had the intro. And I was just looking around on my bookshelf and was like, you know what, I should probably read this one of these days. Why not today? Yeah, turns out pretty good.
I'm so glad you read it. So glad. That one, I think I read it for the first time when I was 14, and it stays with you forever. It's just one of those amazing, and you're so right. Low Men in Yellow Coats just puts a big, bright spotlight on that, and it's incredible.
I'm looking back on it, I'm surprised that I didn't get assigned that in high school. I don't know for sure why that was. I suspect it's because I live in a pretty conservative state, Alabama, And there may have just been stuff in that book that my school was like, yeah, no, we're not teaching that.
Oh,
That wouldn't
man.
surprise me. But I'd love to know what I would have thought of that book if I had read it in high school. I think I would have liked it, but I don't know.
As we sort of make our exit out of here, we've answered all the questions, we've done all of the work. Before we started recording, Bryant told me he has completely finished Fairy Tale, which was just released on the 6th of this month. And I wanted to have you tell the listeners about what you thought of Fairy Tale.
I loved it. I thought it was really, really strong. I think probably I'd give Billy Summers the edge, but those two together are, I'd say, probably his best since at least The Wind Through the Keyhole.
Oh, wow.
Maybe going back a little further even than that to 11/22/63. But I won't be that surprised if there are a lot of King readers that sort of bounce off of Fairy Tale, because it is very much, it's just a fantasy novel. And he's written those before, especially The Eyes of the Dragon, but it may throw some King readers for a loop. That wouldn't surprise me that much. Matter of fact, I know it has. I've read a few things from people just sort of saying, what is this? But mostly people seem to be enjoying it the way I did. Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yay! Oh, I'm so excited. So excited to hear that. I'm staring at my hard copy right next to me right as I chat with you. So that gives me such joy to know that when I finally crack it open, it's going to be a winner. Final thoughts. Do you have an underrated King title that we haven't explored on the show yet that you would like me to keep in mind before the end of the year? Because I am tallying what I would like to complete before year's end. Do you have any votes?
Hmm. I don't know if I do.
I recently put a poll out on Twitter with the 4 C novels. There actually might be more
Right,
C
right.
novels. So, of those 4, do you have one that you feel I should maybe bump to the head of the list?
I voted for Carrie
Yay! Okay.
because that's my favorite of those four, and all four of those are good novels. There would be an interesting reason for you to read Cell that I'm not going to give away, because it's not as big a deal as it would sound like it is if I mention the reason why, which is a really vague thing to say, I know. But Cujo is really good. Christine is really good, but my personal favorite on that group is Carrie, because it's just a really impeccable piece of work, and it's the one that kicked his career off.
I am holding that one on the shelf. I need to get to her. I will in time, most definitely, and I really am looking forward to it. But man, oh man, Mr. Burnett, I need to take a break from the tears. These past few novels have really sucker punched my heart. I've just been crying all over the place, feeling sad. Wizard in Glass sort of smashed me to bits, and then Billy Summers really just threw me into the knives there.
None of those 4C novels quite hit that way, but all four of them have their own punches to throw. I'll say that. So I don't know that you would be totally out of the woods with any of those.
Of course not, for sure. I'm thinking Christine is most likely gonna be the winner, so I think Christine will be next, but I might try and get Carrie before year's end.
Carrie's very short. Carrie, you could almost classify that as a novella. That wouldn't take that much time.
Any final thoughts before we head out, Bryant?
I don't. Well, I was going to ask you, have you seen the trailer for Mr. Harrigan's Phone? It just came out on the day we're doing this recording.
Yes, I did, sir. In between classes, I ran to the ladies and propped my phone as I was washing my hands and just stood there for 3 minutes with mouth agape. Yes, I am thrilled at the casting choices. I'm so excited because I love the hell out of that novella. What did you think?
I thought it looked great, yeah. And I enjoyed that novella, but it was actually my least favorite in that collection, believe it or not. Not because it's not great just because something has to be my least favorite.
Right.
Yeah, the movie looks really good.
It was between Mr. Harrigan's Phone and Rat. I really loved Rat. That was fantastic. And then I think If It Bleeds might have been third. I think I had a couple ties for bronze, and then I'm actually drawing a blank on the fourth one. Oh, it was the Chuck something.
Life of Chuck. That one was my favorite, but there was nothing bad in that collection. So
Yeah, absolutely. Chuck was a fun one. That one was very, very sweet and fun, even though it was grim. Even though it was grim, I still liked it.
this is true.
I am looking forward to the film adaptation of Mr. Harrigan's Phone. We'll have to share our thoughts, but thank you so, so much for being a listener and for writing into the show and sharing your knowledge and your archival glory. I so appreciate you so much, Bryant.
No problem. That goes both ways. I've been a fan of your podcast ever since. I don't think I was there from the very first episode. I think I found it a little bit later on, but not too much longer. But you bring such a different perspective than all the other King podcasts. That's what makes yours great, is that it's not like any of the other ones. And I always look forward to each new episode. I don't know that I'll be looking forward to this one per se. I don't typically listen to myself, but that'll be the only one that I skip.
Thank you so very much. Your kind words have... I'm a little misty-eyed, so thank you so, so much for being an amazing listener and pen pal on all things King. You've definitely enriched my reading and saved the day once or twice when I have asked the listeners, what's going on? And then there's Bryant with the PDF ready to go, and I'm like, bless you, man. So I so appreciate you. Thank you so much for all you give and for being an amazing Constant Reader interview.
Yes, ma'am. You are more than welcome.
I will be sure to include an email if Bryant so wishes, if anybody wants to reach out and ask him about his archive or any archival tips. He can send those your way. I'll have some links for Bryant in the show notes. But thank you once more, sir, and take care.
All righty. Have a good one.
Thank you all so very much for listening to my time with Bryant. He is such a great guy, amazing writer, insightful King fan, and because he's totally the best and we got carried away with all my questions, I forgot to ask Bryant his favorite Stephen King female, which I do believe needs to become a regular question here. I completely spaced on that, but after we finished recording, he swiftly announced his favorite Stephen King female is, of course, Ophelia Todd from Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. Amazing choice, guys. If you haven't checked out that incredible, mysterious muse found within Skeleton Crew's Mrs. Todd's Shortcut, it is, at present, one of my all-time favorite short stories from King. Granted, there are still many roads to travel, and it could be knocked off the top spot, but at present, it is holding strong at number 1 with that gold medal around its neck. But for those of you who are King collectors or you have your own King archive that you're chipping away at and working on, I'm going to attach Bryant Burnette's email in the show notes so you can reach out to him and send him a question or two about advice, tidbits, suggestions, questions, all the good stuff. Bryant will write you back post haste with a rather lovely and articulate explanation of what he recommends. So if you're interested, please reach out to Bryant. Coming up next on the podcast, we are going to be reading Christine for the very first time. That is our pick heading into Spooky Month. It is my second Strange Car of 2022. We read From a Buick 8 a few months earlier. I loved it, loved it, loved it. And I know from popular culture inklings and little whispers here and there that Christine is a bit more sinister. I don't know if Christine is an alien. I don't know anything about Christine, and I haven't seen the film yet, so we're going to be doing both. We are going to read the novel and have some commentary, do our traditional analysis, and then I'm going to get my hands on the film and do some comparing and contrasting because I've heard people really like the film. So I'm actually looking forward to diving into Christine. So that's what's coming up, guys. Hopefully in the next week or two, I will have some coverage for you. Until then, please share the show with a friend if you're enjoying yourself. Say hi if you haven't. Please write the show at underratedsk@gmail.com. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Let me know where you're writing from, what you think. Let's talk about some past episodes, what you're currently reading, any questions. Also, if I've made a flub, if I've made an error in some of my coverage, what's amazingly helpful is some listeners will give me the exact quote or a screenshot. That is life-changing and game-changing for me. So let me know and send along that data so I can quickly remedy my incorrect assumptions. So I appreciate all of you so much. Wherever you are, please take care. And even if you don't use Apple Podcasts, you can head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a 5-star so we can reach out to more King fans and more in the shadows King fans who don't yet know they will be King fans. We're also looking out for them as well. Take care, and we'll be together again soon. Bye-bye.